My name is Rachel Morgan, 32, and I never expected my own sister Victoria would whisper, "I hired PIs to dig up your secrets," at our grandmother's 80th birthday party. With family gathered around, champagne flowing, and Grandma Eleanor beaming, Victoria thought she'd finally expose what she believed were my shameful secrets. I simply smiled back. When the investigators presented their report an hour later, the room fell silent as my truth unfolded. The looks on everyone's faces told me everything had changed forever. If you're watching this, drop a comment about where you are, like and subscribe to hear how my sister's revenge plan transformed our family completely. Growing up in suburban Boston with Victoria was complicated from the start. She was 2 years older, always louder, more confident, and somehow seemed to demand attention in every room. Our dynamic was established early. Victoria was the golden child while I existed in her shadow. Even our physical appearances reinforced this narrative. Victoria with her perfect blonde hair and bright blue eyes that mirrored our father's, while I inherited our mother's darker features and reserved nature. Our parents, Thomas and Diana Morgan, never explicitly favored Victoria, but their actions spoke volumes. Dad beamed with pride at Victoria's academic achievements and social popularity, while my artistic tendencies were treated as nice hobbies that would eventually give way to more practical pursuits. Mom constantly paraded Victoria around to her friends, showcasing her daughter's accomplishments while mine went unmentioned. The pattern was subtle but consistent throughout our childhood. Victoria received new clothes while I got hand-me-downs. Victoria's school events were family priorities, while mine were often missed due to scheduling conflicts, and Victoria's opinions shaped family decisions, while mine were gently set aside. The only person who seemed to truly see me was Grandma Eleanor. While my parents were busy attending Victoria's soccer games and debate competitions, I would slip away to Grandma's cozy house just 3 blocks away. There, surrounded by the scent of cinnamon and old books, I found acceptance. Our Sundays became sacred, Grandma teaching me her secret recipes, sharing stories about her own childhood, and encouraging my artistic talents in ways my parents never did. Victoria noticed this special bond, and it fueled her resentment. I still remember the 7th grade art show where I'd spent weeks creating a watercolor landscape that Grandma had inspired. The morning of the exhibition, I found my painting accidentally soaked by Victoria's spilled orange juice. When I made it to high school, Victoria, already the homecoming queen and student body president, spread rumors that I cheated on tests, undermining the few academic victories I managed to achieve. When I designed a community garden project that won district recognition, Victoria somehow convinced everyone it had been her original idea that I had merely implemented. College brought temporary relief from Victoria's shadow. While she pursued a business degree at an elite university, I studied art therapy at a smaller state school, finding purpose in using creativity to help others heal. Victoria married Jack, the son of a banking executive, right after graduation, posting perfectly filtered wedding photos that made her social media followers swoon. I focused on building a career working with traumatized children, finding fulfillment that didn't translate to Instagram-worthy moments. At family gatherings, Victoria's life achievements were centerpieces of conversation: her executive position, her luxury vacations, her perfectly decorated suburban home. My work was acknowledged with obligatory interest before conversation, inevitably shifted back to Victoria's world. "When will you find a nice man like Jack?" Mom would ask, as though my professional accomplishments meant nothing without a wedding ring. "Art therapy must be so rewarding," Victoria would say with a smile that never reached her eyes, though I could never survive on that salary. Through it all, Grandma Eleanor remained my champion, proudly displaying my artwork in her home and genuinely asking about my patients' progress. This only deepened Victoria's conviction that I was somehow manipulating our grandmother's affection. As Eleanor's health began to decline over the past 2 years, the rift between Victoria and me grew wider. I quietly adjusted my schedule to take Grandma to medical appointments and help with household tasks, while Victoria sent expensive flower arrangements and hired service providers, but rarely made time for visits. At last year's Thanksgiving, after several glasses of wine, Victoria finally verbalized what had been simmering beneath the surface for years. We all know Rachel only spends time with Grandma because she's angling to be the favorite in the will, she announced to the stunned dinner table. Though I defended myself, the seed was planted in the family's mind. When Grandma's 80th birthday approached, Victoria insisted on taking control of the celebration, planning an elaborate country club event that had more to do with impressing her social circle than honoring Eleanor's wishes. 2 weeks before the party, Victoria sent a group email mentioning a special presentation she had planned. When I called my brother Michael to ask about it, his uncomfortable silence told me something was wrong. I never imagined just how personal Victoria's attack would be. The first sign something was off came when my cousin Megan called asking unusually pointed questions about my finances. "I was just wondering how you manage on a therapist's salary," she said with forced casualness. "Especially with the art studio and everything else." I was confused. I'd given up my art studio months ago to save money, but I hadn't told anyone in the family about that decision. 3 days later, leaving my apartment for work, I noticed a dark sedan parked across the street that hadn't been there before. The driver seemed to be watching my building, but quickly drove away when I looked directly at him. I dismissed it as paranoia until I found a business card tucked under my windshield wiper that evening. Definitive investigations. Discretion guaranteed, with only a phone number underneath. My stomach tightened as I remembered Victoria's smile at our last family dinner, overly sweet as she asked detailed questions about my schedule and apartment renovations I'd never mentioned to her. The following week, stopping at my favorite coffee shop before work, I overheard a conversation from the booth behind me. "The Morgan surveillance case is straightforward," a man's voice said quietly. "The sister wants everything. Financials, relationships, daily schedule, the works." I nearly dropped my coffee, heart pounding as I quickly gathered my things and left without looking back. That evening, I called Megan directly. "What's going on?" I demanded, skipping any pretense. Megan hesitated before sighing deeply. "I shouldn't tell you this," she whispered, "but Victoria hired someone to find out what you're hiding. She's convinced you're manipulating Grandma Eleanor for money or something." Although shocked, a strange calm washed over me. I had nothing to hide. No scandals, no secrets that would shame me. My only crime was choosing privacy about the sacrifices I'd made for Grandma Eleanor. Still, the violation felt profound. I spent that night researching what private investigators could legally access: public records, social media, surveillance in public spaces, and grew increasingly uncomfortable thinking about someone documenting my daily life. My friend, Sophia, who worked in corporate security, confirmed my fears when I called her for advice. "If they're professionals, they've probably been following you for weeks already," she said bluntly. "They'll interview associates, monitor your movements, possibly even go through your trash." The reality of Victoria's intrusion hit home 3 days later when I spotted a man with a professional camera taking photos outside the children's hospital where I worked. When I confronted him, he simply said, "Just doing my job, ma'am," before walking briskly away. Later that same week, using Mom's computer to print some documents during a visit, I discovered Victoria had accessed my email account. The password was saved in the browser, and the history showed someone had been reading through months of my correspondence. The violation felt absolute, but instead of confrontation, I chose strategic patience. If Victoria wanted to waste money investigating my boring life, let her. The truth would hardly provide the scandal she clearly hoped for. Still, strange incidents continued to accumulate. Mail missing from my box, items in my car slightly rearranged as though someone had searched it, family members suddenly curious about my volunteer work. At night, I worried about how this would affect Grandma Eleanor if Victoria created a scene at her birthday celebration. The thought of her frail body subjected to family drama during what should be a joyful milestone broke my heart. I began preparing myself mentally for whatever Victoria might have planned. When Michael called a week before the party, his voice was tight with concern. "Rach, I don't know exactly what's happening, but Victoria has something planned for Grandma's party," he warned. "She keeps talking about revelations and family transparency. I think it involves you." I thanked him for the warning, assuring him I could handle whatever Victoria had orchestrated. Inside, though, I felt a curious mixture of dread and determination. Victoria had spent our entire lives trying to diminish me. This time, I wouldn't let her drama overshadow Grandma Eleanor's special day, even if it meant facing public humiliation. What Victoria couldn't possibly understand was that my quiet life contained no scandals, only sacrifices I'd made out of love, not for recognition or praise. As Grandma's birthday approached, I prepared myself for Victoria's special presentation, uncertain of exactly what she'd discovered, but certain of one thing: the truth, whatever form it took in Victoria's hands, was nothing to be ashamed of. Eleanor Williams had never been an ordinary grandmother. After losing her husband Robert to a sudden heart attack at 42, she raised 3 children alone while running the family bookstore that became a community fixture in our Boston suburb. Mom often said Eleanor had enough backbone for 3 people. And it was true. Grandma faced life's challenges with a quiet determination that inspired everyone around her. She never remarried, focusing instead on her children, her business, and later, her grandchildren. While Victoria gravitated toward our parents' business-oriented mindset, I inherited Grandma Eleanor's love for literature and art. Some of my earliest memories were of sitting on her lap as she read poetry aloud, her voice bringing the words to life in a way that made my imagination soar. As I grew older, she encouraged my artistic talents, setting up a small studio space in her spare bedroom where I could experiment with different mediums. "Art speaks truths that words sometimes cannot," she would say, watching me work with a gentle smile. The past 2 years had been difficult for Grandma. First came the arthritis that limited her mobility, then a cancer diagnosis that required aggressive treatment. Though now in remission, the ordeal had left her noticeably frailer. Her once robust frame diminished, silver hair thinner, but her spirit remained undimmed. Her 80th birthday represented not just a milestone, but a victory. She had fought for this moment, and the entire family recognized its significance. In our family, milestone birthdays were always celebrated elaborately. For her 70th, we had surprised Eleanor with a literary-themed party where guests came dressed as famous authors and characters. She had laughed until tears streamed down her face when Uncle Robert appeared as Ernest Hemingway, fake beard and all. This time, however, Eleanor had made a simple request. "I just want all my grandchildren to be happy together," she told me during one of our weekly visits. "No fuss necessary." Victoria had other ideas. "A country club celebration is exactly what Grandma deserves," she declared during the first planning meeting, dismissing Eleanor's stated preferences. "The Riverside has that gorgeous ballroom overlooking the water. It's perfect." While Victoria focused on securing the prestigious venue and ordering custom invitations with gold foil detailing, I worked quietly on creating a handmade memory book, collecting photographs and stories from family and Eleanor's oldest friends. I also arranged for her childhood friend Margaret, who now lived in Arizona, to fly in as a surprise, along with 2 other friends from her book club who had moved away years earlier. When I suggested including these elements at the planning meeting, Victoria sighed dramatically. "Rachel, I've already created a minute-by-minute schedule. There's no time for memory books and old friends reminiscing. This needs to be sophisticated." She assigned me to help with setup, effectively minimizing my role. Later, I discovered Victoria had actually uninvited several of Eleanor's closest friends to make room for Jack's business associates and her own social circle connections. "Grandma needs to meet new people," she explained dismissively when I confronted her. "Besides, those old friends of hers can barely hear or see. They won't miss anything." As the party approached, the schedule Victoria emailed to the family included a 45-minute slot labeled Special Presentation Family Heritage Reflection. When I called to ask about it, Victoria's voice took on an artificially sweet tone. "Just a little surprise I've been working on. Don't worry about it." The venue Victoria selected was undeniably beautiful. The Riverside Country Club sat on manicured grounds with panoramic water views. The ballroom she'd reserved featured crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows, decorated now with Eleanor's favorite blue hydrangeas and silver accents. Everything screamed expense and exclusivity, from the hand-calligraphed place cards to the 5-piece string ensemble Victoria had hired. On the morning of the party, I arrived early, hoping to ensure Grandma would have comfortable seating and regular breaks throughout the event. Victoria arrived moments later, looking immaculate in a designer dress, immediately barking orders at the staff. "The ice sculpture needs to be more prominent," she instructed, barely acknowledging my presence. As she brushed past me to inspect the gift table, she leaned in close. "I hope you're ready for today," she murmured, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I think everyone will find it very educational." Her words confirmed my suspicions about the special presentation, but I simply nodded, focusing instead on the silver-framed photos of Grandma I was arranging. This celebration wasn't about Victoria's agenda, or even my discomfort. It was about honoring the remarkable woman who had shaped all our lives with her strength and love. Whatever Victoria had planned, I would face it with the same quiet dignity Grandma Eleanor had always modeled. Looking around at the opulent decorations, I couldn't help but think Eleanor would have preferred her cozy living room filled with beloved faces over this showy display, but I was determined to make the day special for her regardless. As family members began to arrive, I positioned myself near the entrance, ready to help Grandma navigate what promised to be a complicated afternoon. Complicated in ways perhaps even Victoria didn't fully anticipate. The secrets Victoria was so eager to expose weren't at all what she imagined. Last year, when Grandma Eleanor's cancer required specialized treatment her insurance wouldn't fully cover, I took unpaid leave from the hospital to care for her. The time off meant falling behind on my rent, but Eleanor's needs came first. Without telling anyone, I sold 3 of my most valuable paintings to an art collector in New York, pieces that had been featured in a small gallery showing and represented months of work. The $17,000 they brought covered the treatment gap and allowed Eleanor to receive care from a top oncologist. During her recovery, I spent nights sleeping on a fold-out chair in her hospital room, working remotely during the day when possible, and taking evening shifts at a local hospice center to make up lost income. No one in the family knew because I didn't want Eleanor to feel like a burden or my parents to use it as evidence that my career choices were financially unstable. The volunteer work Victoria found so suspicious was actually an art therapy program I developed for children dealing with trauma and loss. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I spent evenings at Hope Children's Hospital helping kids process their emotions through creative expression. The program operated on minimal funding, so I often purchased supplies with my own money and recruited artists, friends to donate time. Last fall, I was offered a promotion that would have doubled my salary and given me a proper office instead of the converted storage room I currently used. The catch was relocating to Chicago to help establish a new therapy wing. I declined immediately, knowing it would mean leaving Eleanor during her most vulnerable time. My former fiancé Ryan couldn't understand this decision. "She has other family," he argued during our final fight. "Your sister lives 20 minutes away. Why does it always have to be you?" When I explained that Victoria rarely visited and that Eleanor needed consistent support, not occasional luxury gifts, Ryan delivered an ultimatum: the job opportunity or our relationship. I still have the engagement ring in a drawer somewhere, a reminder that some prices are worth paying for the people we love. My mysterious 3-month absence from family gatherings last spring wasn't about secretly traveling to exotic locations as Victoria suspected. I had joined a disaster relief initiative following a major hurricane in Louisiana, using my therapy skills to help displaced children process their trauma through art. The work was emotionally draining but fulfilling, and I returned with a deeper appreciation for the stability my grandmother had always provided in my life. During those months, I called Eleanor daily, but kept details vague to avoid worrying her. The scholarship fund I'd established in Eleanor's name at the local arts college was perhaps my most cherished secret. Using the proceeds from a series of commissioned pieces and teaching weekend workshops, I'd created a modest endowment that would help one student each year pursue studies in literature or fine arts, subjects that had defined Eleanor's life. The foundation administrators had agreed to keep my contribution anonymous until after the first scholarship was awarded next fall. I had downgraded from my 1-bedroom apartment to a studio half the size to reduce expenses while helping Michael through his divorce last year. He had 3 children and was drowning in legal fees while trying to maintain stability for the kids. The money I saved on rent went directly to covering his children's school expenses and therapy sessions. The family assumed I moved because of plumbing issues in the old building, a convenient fiction Michael and I maintained to protect his pride. My work with troubled teens in underfunded schools happened at dawn before my regular job started, providing art therapy sessions to students who wouldn't otherwise have access to mental health support. The early mornings left me perpetually tired, but fulfilled in ways my regular position couldn't match. The program director often commented that I was quietly changing lives, which meant more to me than any public recognition. 2 months ago, while caring for Eleanor during a particularly difficult weekend following her immunotherapy treatment, I experienced severe chest pains that sent me to the emergency room. The diagnosis was exhaustion and anxiety. Not the heart attack I feared, but the doctor's warning to prioritize self-care went unheeded. I never told Eleanor or anyone else in the family, concerned it would only add to their worries. The journal entries Victoria's investigators likely discovered documented not scandalous secrets, but my ongoing struggle to balance family obligations with self-preservation. Sometimes I wonder if letting people know what I'm doing would make it easier, or harder, I wrote in one entry. Is privacy about protecting myself or preventing others from feeling obligated to help? These private struggles weren't kept secret out of shame, but from a deeply held belief that good deeds lose something essential when performed for recognition. Grandma Eleanor had taught me that by example. Her countless quiet kindnesses to neighbors and friends over the years were never announced, but simply offered with an open heart. As Victoria's investigation dug deeper into my life, I worried not about what they'd find, but about how their discoveries would affect Eleanor. Learning the extent of my sacrifices might cause her pain, make her feel responsible for my choices, or create family conflict she didn't have the strength to manage. The night before her birthday party, I sat alone in my small studio apartment, surrounded by art supplies and half-finished projects, wondering if my commitment to privacy had been misguided. Perhaps transparency would have prevented Victoria's suspicions from festering into this elaborate investigation. Too late now, I thought, carefully wrapping Eleanor's birthday gift, a hand-bound collection of her favorite poems illustrated with my watercolors. Whatever tomorrow brought, I would face it with the grace Grandma had modeled throughout her life. The Riverside Country Club transformed under Victoria's meticulous direction. Crystal vases holding perfect hydrangea arrangements in Eleanor's favorite shade of blue adorned each table. Silver balloons formed an elegant arch over the entrance, and floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the sparkling lake beyond the manicured grounds. I arrived 90 minutes early, Eleanor's gift tucked carefully under my arm, hoping to ensure everything would be comfortable for her arrival. Victoria was already there, designer heels clicking across the marble floor as she directed the staff with military precision. "The cake table needs to be centered exactly," she instructed a nervous-looking server, "and those chairs need to be replaced. They don't match the aesthetic." When she spotted me, her expression shifted to a strange mixture of satisfaction and disdain. "Rachel, you're early," she observed, eyes flicking over my simple blue dress. I had splurged on something new for the occasion, but next to Victoria's couture outfit, it suddenly seemed inadequate. She leaned closer, perfume cloud enveloping me as she whispered, "I hope you're prepared for some surprises today. Everyone will finally see the truth." I simply nodded, maintaining my composure despite the knot forming in my stomach. "I'm just happy we're celebrating Grandma," I replied, moving past her to arrange my gift on the designated table. For the next hour, I helped the staff position comfortable cushions on Eleanor's chair and created a small quiet area in an adjacent room where she could rest if the celebration became overwhelming. Victoria watched from a distance, her constant phone checks and whispered conversations with unfamiliar people heightening my anxiety about what she had planned. At precisely 3 o'clock, Eleanor arrived, assisted by her part-time caregiver Maria. My heart squeezed at the sight of her, thinner than just a month ago, moving slowly with her ornate cane, but her eyes bright with excitement beneath her carefully styled silver hair. She wore a royal blue dress we had shopped for together, simple but elegant, with Grandpa Robert's locket around her neck. "My beautiful girls," she exclaimed as Victoria and I approached. Victoria reached her first, bending to air kiss her cheek carefully to avoid disturbing her makeup. "Grandma, you look perfect," she declared. "Everyone important is coming. The Richardsons, the Hammonds, even Judge Peterson." Eleanor nodded politely, but her eyes sought mine over Victoria's shoulder. When I reached her, I embraced her, fully, feeling her bird-like frame beneath the fabric. "Happy birthday, Grandma," I whispered. "I'm so happy to be here with you." Eleanor squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Having both my granddaughters here is the greatest gift," she said, looking meaningfully between Victoria and me. If she noticed the tension, she didn't acknowledge it. As guests began arriving, the pattern established itself quickly. Victoria orchestrated the celebration like a theatrical production, positioning Eleanor at strategic points to greet influential guests, summoning professional photographers to capture perfectly composed moments, and maintaining a running commentary about the expense and exclusivity of each element. "The flowers were imported," I overheard her telling Aunt Patricia, "and the chef trained in Paris." Meanwhile, I stayed close to Eleanor, noticing when she needed water, monitoring her energy levels, and quietly interceding when conversations ran too long. Uncle Robert arrived with his typical bombastic energy, loudly proclaiming 80 years young, while presenting Eleanor with an enormous gift basket. Aunt Patricia fussed over Victoria's party planning genius while barely acknowledging my presence. Cousins arrived with their children in tow, the little ones dressed uncomfortably in formal attire that restricted their natural exuberance. Michael slipped in late, catching my eye with a worried look that confirmed he knew something about Victoria's plans. When Eleanor requested I sit beside her during the meal, Victoria's smile tightened noticeably. "I've already arranged the seating, Grandma," she said smoothly. "Rachel is at table 3 with the cousins." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. "On my birthday, I believe I can decide who sits with me," she replied with gentle firmness that brooked no argument. Victoria rearranged the place cards with poorly concealed irritation. Throughout the elaborate 5-course meal, I noticed unfamiliar people with professional cameras documenting every moment. They weren't the official photographers Victoria had hired. These individuals moved more discreetly, occasionally conferring over their shots. Private investigators, I realized, still gathering evidence for whatever presentation Victoria had planned. Victoria herself kept checking her watch and typing on her phone, her attention clearly focused on something beyond the current celebrations. The champagne toast she delivered was perfect on the surface, thanking guests for coming, celebrating Eleanor's life accomplishments, but contained subtle barbs about family loyalty and appearances versus reality that made my skin prickle. The elaborate meal progressed through course after course. Delicate seafood appetizers, seasonal salads with ingredients I couldn't identify, perfectly cooked beef tenderloin, and finally, individual soufflés that drew appreciative murmurs from the guests. Throughout it all, Eleanor maintained her gracious presence despite visibly tiring as the hours passed. When she whispered that she needed a brief rest, I escorted her to the quiet room I'd prepared, Victoria trailing behind, us with concern that seemed more about disrupted scheduling than Eleanor's well-being. "The gift presentation is in 20 minutes, Victoria reminded us tensely, "and the special presentation cannot be delayed." Eleanor patted her hand reassuringly. "I'll be ready, dear. Rachel will make sure of it." When gifts were presented, Victoria orchestrated the process like a television host, ensuring her own extravagant present, a diamond bracelet that must have cost thousands, received appropriate gasps of admiration. When Eleanor opened my handmade memory book, filled with photographs and stories collected from her friends and family, Victoria attempted to rush through it. But Eleanor insisted on examining each page, tears forming in her eyes at the collected memories. "This contains my whole life," she said quietly, squeezing my hand. As dessert concluded, Victoria tapped her glass authoritatively. "Everyone, please direct your attention to the screen. We have a special presentation to honor Eleanor's legacy." Her eyes met mine across the room, triumph barely concealed as staff rearranged the room, positioning chairs to face a large projection screen. Eleanor was guided to a central seat, confusion evident on her face as she sensed the underlying current. of tension. Jack, Victoria's husband, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, not meeting my eyes. Michael moved closer to me, his presence silently supportive. As the lights dimmed slightly, I took a deep breath, preparing for whatever Victoria had orchestrated. Eleanor reached for my hand in the semi-darkness, her fingers cool against mine. "Whatever happens," she whispered, somehow sensing the coming storm, "remember that I love you both." Those simple words strengthened my resolve to face Victoria's truth with dignity, no matter how she had twisted my private choices into ammunition. Victoria's Louboutin heels clicked dramatically against the hardwood floor as she positioned herself at the front of the room, champagne flute raised to command attention. The conversations around us died to expectant murmurs as she tapped her glass once more. "Before we continue our celebration," she announced, voice projecting to reach even the farthest tables, "there's an important truth that needs to be shared." Her gaze locked directly on me, smile sharp as a blade. Eleanor shifted in her seat, confusion clouding her expression as she sensed the sudden tension. Family members exchanged glances, the atmosphere transforming from celebration to unease in seconds. Victoria set down her glass and adopted what I recognized as her corporate presentation posture. Shoulders back, chin slightly elevated, expression serious but controlled. "Family means everything to me," she began, the rehearsed quality of her speech unmistakable. "Which is why transparency and honesty within a family are sacred values." A few guests nodded in vague agreement, while others looked increasingly uncomfortable. Michael's hand found my shoulder, a silent gesture of support. "Unfortunately," Victoria continued, her voice taking on a sorrowful tone that rang false to anyone who knew her well, "sometimes the people closest to us hide their true nature. Sometimes deception occurs right under our noses." Her gaze swept dramatically around the room before landing on me again. I kept my expression neutral, determined not to give her the reaction she clearly wanted. Beside me, Eleanor's confusion deepened to concern. "Victoria, dear," she interjected gently, "what is this about? We're here to celebrate a birthday." Victoria's smile tightened momentarily before she regained composure. "This is about celebration, Grandma. Celebrating truth and family integrity." She gestured toward the back of the room with theatrical flair. "I'd like to introduce some special guests who have important information to share with our family." A well-dressed man and woman entered, carrying leather portfolios and wearing expressions of professional detachment. The woman's dark hair was pulled into a severe bun, while the man's gray suit looked expensive and understated. They positioned themselves beside Victoria with practiced efficiency. "These are Daniel Russo and Amelia Hayes from Definitive Investigations," Victoria announced, satisfaction evident in her tone. "For the past 3 months, they have been conducting a thorough investigation into certain activities that have raised serious concerns." Shocked gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Aunt Patricia's hand flew to her pearls, while Uncle Robert's face flushed dark red. Eleanor's grip on my hand tightened painfully. "What investigation?" she asked, voice steady despite her evident distress. "Victoria, what have you done?" Victoria ignored the question, continuing her presentation. "I believe we all deserve to know the truth about how certain people have been manipulating this family, particularly you, Grandma." Her gaze fixed on me with undisguised hostility. "Some people have been very busy creating a false image while secretly pursuing their own agenda." Michael stood abruptly. "Victoria, this is completely inappropriate," he objected, voice tight with anger. "This is Grandma's birthday celebration, not some corporate takedown." Victoria waved him off dismissively. "The truth is never inappropriate, Michael. Grandma deserves to know what's really been happening." She turned to the investigators. "Please, distribute your findings to the key family members." The female investigator, Amelia, hesitated slightly, exchanging a glance with her colleague before removing several bound reports from her portfolio. She moved around the room, placing them in front of my parents, Uncle Robert, Aunt Patricia, and finally, Eleanor. Victoria stood watching with barely contained excitement, like a child on Christmas morning. The male investigator, Daniel, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mrs. Hamilton," he addressed Victoria formally, "perhaps we should discuss whether, this is the appropriate venue for—" Victoria cut him off with a sharp gesture. "We agreed on full disclosure," she insisted. "Please proceed with your presentation as planned." I remained seated, back straight, hands now folded calmly in my lap, as Eleanor slowly opened the report in front of her. Her expression shifted from confusion to concentration as she scanned the first page. Victoria directed her attention back to the assembled guests. "For those without reports, I'll summarize what they discovered about my sister Rachel's secret life." She nearly spat my name, years of resentment breaking through her polished veneer. While presenting herself as the devoted granddaughter, Rachel has been— The male investigator interrupted, stepping forward with unexpected authority. "If I may," he said firmly, establishing control of the presentation Victoria had clearly expected to lead. "Since you've commissioned our services, Mrs. Hamilton, I believe it's most appropriate for us to present our findings directly." Victoria's smile faltered momentarily before she nodded, stepping slightly to the side. "Of course. Please enlighten everyone." Daniel Russo adjusted his tie and addressed the room with professional detachment. "Our firm was engaged to investigate Rachel Morgan's activities, finances, and relationships over the past 2 years. After thorough research, including surveillance, financial analysis, and interviews with associates, we have compiled the following findings." He nodded to Amelia, who activated a presentation on the screen. The first slide appeared, a bank statement with several transactions highlighted. Victoria's triumphant expression began to waver as she scanned the information. "Ms. Morgan sold 3 valuable original artworks to the Westbrook Gallery in New York approximately 14 months ago for $17,000, Amelia stated, her tone clinically precise. "Our investigation revealed that these funds were transferred directly to Memorial Cancer Center to cover specialized treatment for Eleanor Morgan that was not fully covered by insurance." Gasps filled the room again, but of a different quality than Victoria had anticipated. Eleanor's hand trembled as she turned the page in her report. Daniel continued, his voice steady. "Further investigation revealed that Ms. Morgan took 12 weeks of unpaid leave from her position at Boston Children's Hospital during this period to provide full-time care for her grandmother." The next slide showed hospital visitor logs with my name highlighted day after day. "Hospital staff confirmed Ms. Morgan often slept in Mrs. Eleanor Morgan's room during her 2-week inpatient treatment." Victoria stepped forward, clearly thrown, off balance by the direction of the presentation. "But what about—" she began, but Amelia continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Regarding Ms. Morgan's supposedly suspicious absences from family events last spring, our investigation confirmed she was working with the Gulf Coast Disaster Relief Initiative, providing trauma therapy to children displaced by Hurricane Laura. Photos appeared on screen showing me working with children amid devastation, creating art from salvaged materials. She maintained daily phone contact with her grandmother during this period." Victoria's face had lost its triumphant glow, confusion, and growing horror replacing her earlier satisfaction. She flipped frantically through her copy of the report, seemingly searching for different information than what was being presented. "This isn't what we discussed," she hissed at Daniel, who merely raised an eyebrow before continuing. "Our financial investigation revealed that Ms. Morgan established the Eleanor Williams Literary and Art Scholarship at Boston Community College last year, using proceeds from teaching weekend workshops and commissioned artwork. The scholarship will support 1 student annually pursuing studies in literature or fine arts." Eleanor gasped audibly, tears forming in her eyes as she looked at me with newfound understanding. "Rachel, is this true?" she whispered. I nodded, slightly squeezing her hand. Amelia continued the presentation, her professional demeanor never wavering. Ms. Morgan declined a promotion opportunity that would have doubled her salary because it required relocation to Chicago, which would have prevented her from providing ongoing support to her grandmother during cancer treatment and recovery. Victoria interrupted, voice rising with obvious frustration. "What about the suspicious meetings? The unexplained income? The manipulative behavior?" Daniel regarded her calmly. Our investigation found no evidence of suspicious meetings beyond Ms. Morgan's volunteer work at Hope Children's Hospital, where she provides art therapy to traumatized children twice weekly, often purchasing supplies with her personal funds. He paused, consulting his notes. Regarding unexplained income, our financial analysis indicates Ms. Morgan actually lives well below her means, having downsized her apartment last year to help support her brother Michael's children during his divorce proceedings. All eyes turned to Michael, who looked down, clearly uncomfortable with this private matter being exposed. Daniel continued, seemingly determined to complete his report despite Victoria's growing agitation. Finally, regarding manipulative behavior, our interviews with Eleanor Morgan's medical providers, neighbors, and friends consistently described Rachel Morgan as respectful of her grandmother's independence while providing necessary support. Not one person interviewed suggested any manipulation whatsoever. Victoria grabbed the remote control, attempting to stop the presentation. "This isn't the complete report," she insisted, voice rising. "Where are the findings about the secret boyfriend, the mysterious cash withdrawals, the conversations with estate lawyers?" Amelia exchanged a glance with Daniel before responding. "Mrs. Hamilton, as we explained in our preliminary discussions, we found no evidence of any romantic relationship, suspicious cash transactions, or consultations with estate planners. The withdrawals you flagged were traced to art supply purchases and contributions to children's therapy programs." The room had fallen completely silent, all eyes now moving between Victoria and me. Eleanor slowly closed her report and looked up at Victoria, disappointment evident in her expression. "You hired investigators to spy on your sister?" she asked, voice quiet but carrying clearly in the hushed room. Victoria flushed, her composure cracking. "I was protecting you, Grandma. Rachel has been acting so secretive, always positioning herself as the devoted granddaughter while the rest of us are too busy. I knew she must have ulterior motives." Daniel cleared his throat. "I believe I should mention one final finding," he said, his professional tone softening slightly. "In our professional experience, we rarely encounter cases where the subject of investigation demonstrates the level of selfless dedication Ms. Morgan has shown. My colleague and I were particularly moved by the discovery that Ms. Morgan experienced a health emergency 2 months ago, chest pains requiring emergency room treatment, but continued caring for her grandmother without informing family members to avoid causing additional worry." Eleanor turned to me, shock and concern flooding her face. "Rachel, you were in the hospital?" The room erupted in murmurs and exclamations as Victoria stood frozen, her carefully orchestrated exposure collapsing around her. Jack rose from his seat and approached her, whispering something in her ear that made her shoulders stiffen. Eleanor's attention remained fixed on me, her eyes filled with tears of understanding. "All this time," she whispered, "you never said a word about any of it." Before I could respond, Victoria found her voice again. "This can't be everything," she insisted desperately. "There must be something else you found. No one is this perfect." Amelia closed her portfolio with finality. "Mrs. Hamilton, as I believe our report demonstrates comprehensively, your sister has consistently prioritized your grandmother's well-being over her own comfort, career advancement, and financial security. She has done so quietly, without seeking recognition or advantage." She paused, adding with subtle emphasis, "Unlike others we've observed during this investigation." Victoria's face flushed dark red at the implied criticism. Eleanor struggled to stand, waving away helping hands. "I need to speak with my granddaughters," she announced firmly, alone. The room watched in stunned silence as Eleanor, suddenly appearing stronger and more commanding despite her frail frame, led Victoria and me toward the private sitting area I had arranged earlier. The birthday celebration had indeed provided revelations, just not the ones Victoria had anticipated. "The financial records show consistent patterns of sacrifice," Amelia Hayes stated, her professional tone unwavering as she continued the presentation. The screen displayed bank statements highlighting regular payments from my modest checking account to various medical facilities. Ms. Morgan's art sales through the Westbrook Gallery generated approximately $23,000 over the past 18 months. Our investigation traced 90% of these funds to healthcare costs for Eleanor Morgan, including specialized treatments, home modifications for safety, and private nursing care during critical recovery periods. Victoria stood rigidly. By the screen, her expression cycling between disbelief and growing horror as the investigator methodically dismantled her narrative. The female investigator advanced to the next slide, showing a calendar dense with highlighted dates. Ms. Morgan's volunteer schedule at Hope Children's Hospital shows she provided art therapy services to traumatized children every Tuesday and Thursday evening from 6 to 9 p.m., often purchasing supplies with personal funds when program budgets were exhausted. She gestured to another section of the report. Interviews with hospital staff described Ms. Morgan as tireless, selfless, and the first to arrive, last to leave. One child psychologist specifically noted that Ms. Morgan often worked with the most challenging cases that other therapists were reluctant to take on. Eleanor's hand trembled as she turned pages in the report, tears forming in her eyes. The presentation continued relentlessly, each slide revealing another layer of my quiet dedication rather than the scandal Victoria had clearly anticipated. During Eleanor Morgan's cancer treatment, hospital surveillance footage confirmed Ms. Morgan spent 73 nights sleeping in a chair beside her grandmother's bed while maintaining day shifts at her employment when possible. Photos appeared of me sleeping in an uncomfortable hospital chair, my hand resting on Eleanor's while medical equipment hummed in the background. Daniel Russo stepped forward, adding his own observations. Our investigation discovered Ms. Morgan was offered the position of Regional Creative Therapy Director at Midwest Children's Hospital in Chicago last October. The position included a salary increase of approximately 108%, housing allowance, and significant career advancement opportunities. He paused, allowing the information to register. Ms. Morgan declined the position, specifically citing her commitment to her grandmother's care as the determining factor. This decision resulted in her continuing to live in a 400-square-foot studio apartment rather than the comfortable lifestyle the new position would have afforded. Aunt Patricia gasped audibly, her hand covering her mouth. Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier dismissive attitude toward my career choices visibly shaken. My mother stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Surprise mingled with what might have been shame. Victoria frantically flipped through her copy of the report, seemingly searching for different information than what was being presented. But what about the suspicious meetings with lawyers? The estate planning? There must be something else, she insisted, voice rising with desperation. Amelia shook her head slightly. The meetings Ms. Morgan attended with legal professionals were related to establishing the Eleanor Williams Scholarship Foundation, which required specific legal structures to ensure long-term viability. At no point did our investigation find evidence of any discussions regarding inheritance or estate matters. The presentation continued with documentation of my apartment downsizing. Ms. Morgan relocated from a one-bedroom unit to a studio half the size approximately 14 months ago. Financial records indicate that $850 monthly savings were consistently transferred to an educational trust for Michael Morgan's children following his divorce proceedings. All eyes turned briefly to Michael, who looked down, clearly uncomfortable with his private struggles being exposed. Eleanor's breathing had become shaky, each revelation clearly impacting her deeply. The male investigator adjusted his tie before addressing the room again. In our professional capacity, we have conducted hundreds of background investigations. It is extremely rare to discover an individual whose private actions so consistently demonstrate character without any expectation of recognition or reward. He actually smiled slightly, the first crack in his professional demeanor. I feel obligated to note that, in preparing this report, my colleague and I were particularly moved by certain discoveries. His voice softened perceptibly. Ms. Morgan's weekly visits to Sunset Acres Retirement Community to provide art classes for seniors suffering from dementia showed remarkable consistency over the past 3 years. Staff there informed us that when budget cuts threatened the program, Ms. Morgan continued the classes without compensation, providing materials from her own resources. Eleanor's tears were flowing freely now, her gaze fixed on me with an expression of mingled pride and sorrow. Victoria's face had lost all color, her carefully applied makeup now accentuating her shock rather than her features. "If I may add a personal observation," Amelia interjected, her professional tone warming slightly, "the interview subjects consistently described Ms. Morgan as someone who never seeks credit and does the right thing when no one is watching." These character assessments were unanimous across medical professionals, volunteer coordinators, and community members. Daniel nodded in agreement before continuing. "Our final significant finding concerns Ms. Morgan's establishment of the Eleanor Williams Care Fund, a separate financial resource from the scholarship specifically created to ensure any future medical or care needs would be covered without peer family financial strain. Ms. Morgan established this fund through an additional art commission series completed during pre-dawn hours before her regular employment." The room had fallen completely silent, the only sound Eleanor's quiet sniffles as she processed each revelation. Victoria stood frozen, her carefully orchestrated exposure transformed into something entirely different from what she had envisioned. Jack, Victoria's husband, rose from his seat and approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder with an expression that conveyed both support and profound disappointment. My father, typically stoic and reserved, wiped surreptitiously at his eyes. Daniel closed his portfolio with finality. "That concludes our formal presentation of findings. The complete documentation is provided in your reports." He hesitated before adding, "On behalf of Definitive Investigations, I wish to apologize for any invasion of privacy our work may have caused. While we conducted our investigation within legal parameters, we recognize the personal nature of the information revealed today." Amelia nodded in agreement. "In our professional opinion, there was nothing to investigate here beyond a pattern of exceptional personal sacrifice and commitment to family." Victoria finally found her voice, though it emerged strangled and thin. "But this can't be everything," she insisted. "Nobody is this selfless without an agenda." Eleanor slowly closed her report and raised her hand, silencing the room with the simple gesture. Despite her physical frailty, her moral authority remained absolute. "I think I've heard enough," she said, voice steady despite her tears. "I would like to speak with my granddaughters. Alone." As Eleanor rose shakily to her feet, Rachel moved immediately to support her arm. After a moment's hesitation, Victoria followed, her perfect posture now slumped in defeat as they moved toward the private sitting area. The birthday celebration had indeed featured revelations, just not the scandalous ones Victoria had anticipated. As we left the main room, I heard Daniel Russo speak quietly to the stunned family members. "In 15 years of conducting investigations, I have rarely encountered someone who so consistently puts others before themselves. You have an extraordinary family member in Rachel Morgan." The private sitting room felt unnaturally quiet after the charged atmosphere of the main hall. Eleanor lowered herself carefully onto the plush sofa, her movements deliberate but firm, radiating a dignity that transcended her physical frailty. Victoria and I stood awkwardly on either side until Eleanor patted the cushions beside her. "Sit, both of you," she instructed, her voice gentle but leaving no room for refusal. For a moment, we were children again, called to grandmother's living, room to resolve some childhood squabble. Victoria perched stiffly on the edge of the sofa, her perfect posture now serving as armor rather than elegance. I sat on Eleanor's other side, acutely aware of her hand finding mine, her papery skin cool against my palm. Eleanor looked between us, her blue eyes clear and penetrating despite the tears that had left tracks on her powdered cheeks. "Victoria," she began, her tone holding disappointment rather than anger, "I cannot begin to express how deeply saddened I am by what you've done." Victoria's carefully composed expression cracked slightly, a flash of the little girl seeking approval visible beneath her polished exterior. "I just wanted the truth, Grandma," she defended, voice higher than normal. "Rachel has been so secretive, always positioned as the perfect granddaughter, while the rest of us are too busy with our real lives and responsibilities. I needed to know what she was hiding." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "Truth without compassion is just cruelty, Victoria. What you did wasn't about truth. It was about exposing your sister, about winning some competition that exists only in your mind. Victoria's eyes glistened with unshed tears, her lower lip trembling slightly before she caught herself, straightening her shoulders defensively. "You've always favored her," she accused, years of perceived slights bubbling to the surface. "Always. Thought she was so special with her art and her sensitivity, while I was just the shallow one obsessed with appearances. You never saw how hard I worked, how much I achieved, because you were too busy admiring Rachel's mediocre paintings and listening to her talk about feelings." The words tumbled out with unexpected rawness, as though Victoria had finally uncorked a bottle of resentments she'd been carefully preserving for years. I stared at her in genuine shock. "You thought Grandma favored me?" I asked incredulously. "Victoria, our entire lives, you've been the golden child. Mom and Dad bragged about your achievements, attended every event, proudly displayed your trophies and awards. I was always the disappointment, the one who chose the impractical path." Victoria laughed bitterly. "That's because my achievements were the only ones they understood. Academic awards, business success, marrying well. Those were the metrics they valued. But you," she pointed an accusatory finger, "you had Grandma's unconditional approval, just for being sensitive and artistic. Do you have any idea what it's like competing with someone who's celebrated simply for who they are rather than what they achieve?" Eleanor's hand tightened on mine as she turned to Victoria. "Is that what you believe? That I loved Rachel more because of her artistic nature?" Victoria's perfect makeup couldn't disguise the flush spreading across her cheeks. "You always gave her special attention, special time. You taught her to cook your secret recipes, shared your stories with her, displayed her artwork. Meanwhile, I got polite interest in my accomplishments, but never that same connection." Her voice broke on the final word, revealing the vulnerable core beneath her polished exterior. Eleanor's expression softened with understanding. "Oh, Victoria, the truth is exactly the opposite of what you believe. I've always worried more about you precisely because you seem so focused on external validation and appearances." Victoria's head snapped up in surprise as Eleanor continued. "Rachel found her own path early on and seemed content with, or without, the world's approval. But you, my darling girl, have been chasing recognition and validation your entire life, measuring your worth by others' perceptions. That's why I've worried more, not loved less." The room fell silent as Victoria absorbed these words, her carefully constructed narrative slowly crumbling. I watched emotions play across her face, disbelief, consideration, and finally, the first hints of recognition. "Why did you keep everything secret?" Victoria asked suddenly, turning to me. "All these sacrifices, all this care for Grandma. Why hide it unless you were playing martyr?" I considered my answer carefully, recognizing the importance of honesty in this fragile moment. "I never wanted recognition for doing what felt right," I explained quietly. "And I certainly never wanted to make anyone else feel inadequate for not doing the same. We all have different strengths, different ways of showing love. My way just happens to be quieter." Victoria laughed incredulously. "So perfectly selfless. As always." Eleanor interceded firmly. "Victoria, this competitive attitude is exactly what's damaged your relationship with your sister. Rachel wasn't plotting against you by keeping her actions private. Not everything is about positioning or advantage." Victoria's expression hardened momentarily before crumpling into something more vulnerable. "It's always been so easy for her," she whispered, tears finally spilling onto her cheeks. "Everyone thinks she's so authentic and caring while I'm just shallow and materialistic. But they don't understand how hard I've worked for everything, how much pressure I've felt to be perfect, to achieve, to represent the family successfully. For the first time, I truly saw my sister, not the polished, confident woman who seemed to navigate life effortlessly, but someone carrying her own burdens, fighting her own battles. I've envied you my entire life, Victoria," I admitted softly, her head snapped up in disbelief. "What could you possibly envy about me? Your confidence, your certainty, the way mom and dad beam with pride over your accomplishments, the ease with which you move through social situations, your beautiful home and successful marriage, your seemingly perfect life. Victoria stared at me, genuinely shocked. But you're the one with meaning and purpose. Your work actually matters. People need you. All I do is make money and throw parties that impress the right people. Eleanor reached out, taking one hand from each of us. My beautiful, complicated granddaughters, she said, voice thick with emotion. All these years misunderstanding each other, each envying what the other possessed, neither seeing your own unique value. She squeezed our hands firmly. I have regrets of my own. Perhaps I should have addressed these dynamics years ago instead of hoping you would find your way to mutual appreciation. Victoria wiped at her tears, smearing her carefully applied makeup. I don't know how to be different, she admitted in a small voice that reminded me of the little girl who once asked me to check her closet for monsters. I've built my entire identity around achievement and appearances. And I've probably been too private, too reluctant to share my struggles, I acknowledged. It's easier sometimes to help others than to be vulnerable enough to accept help. Eleanor nodded slowly. The healing begins with this understanding. Victoria, your organizational skills and social connections are valuable gifts. Imagine what might happen if you directed them toward causes that truly matter to you. And Rachel, your compassion means little if you're too exhausted to sustain it. Accepting support isn't weakness. A tentative knock at the door interrupted our conversation. Michael peered in, concern evident on his face. Everything okay? In here? People are wondering when you'll return to the party. Eleanor smiled at her grandson. We'll be out shortly. Tell everyone to enjoy the cake. We're having an important family discussion. After Michael withdrew, Victoria turned to me with visible effort. I'm sorry, she said, the words clearly unfamiliar in this context. The investigation was meant to expose you, to prove you were manipulating Grandma for inheritance, or something equally self-serving. I never imagined... She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. I understand more than you think, I replied gently. We're all shaped by our perceptions and insecurities. I should have been more open about Grandma's care instead of handling everything alone. Eleanor looked between us, a tentative hope in her eyes. Before we return to the party, I want you both to promise me something. Promise you'll try to communicate honestly going forward. Promise you'll attempt to see each other clearly, without the distortions of old resentments and comparisons. Victoria hesitated before nodding slowly. I can try, Grandma. Me too, I agreed, though I imagine it won't always be easy. Eleanor smiled, the lines around her eyes deepening. The most worthwhile things rarely are. As we prepared to rejoin the celebration, Victoria paused at the door. What do I tell everyone out there? How do I explain? She gestured vaguely, unable to articulate the magnitude of her miscalculation. Perhaps simply acknowledge that families are complicated, Eleanor suggested gently, and that today has brought important understandings. Victoria nodded, visibly gathering her composure, before opening the door. As we re-entered the main room, I noticed the investigators had departed, leaving behind their revelatory reports. The family gathered around us, questions in their eyes but restraint in their manner, sensing the fragility of the moment. Victoria surprised me by taking my hand briefly, giving it a quick squeeze before releasing it. A small gesture that communicated more than words could have. The birthday celebration resumed, though transformed by what had transpired. The perfect facade had cracked, revealing something more genuine underneath. Messy and imperfect, but perhaps ultimately stronger. 3 weeks after Grandma Eleanor's birthday revelation, I sat in a small coffee shop downtown, anxiously checking my watch. Victoria had suggested this meeting, our first one-on-one conversation since the dramatic events at the Riverside Country Club. When she walked through the door, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the perfectly coiffed executive in designer clothes. Instead, Victoria wore simple jeans, a casual sweater, and minimal makeup, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger, more approachable, and decidedly uncomfortable. "Sorry, I'm late," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. Traffic was worse than I expected. An awkward silence settled between us as the barista delivered Victoria's latte. She traced the rim of her cup with one finger, avoiding eye contact. "I don't really know how to do this," she finally admitted. "I've spent my whole life competing with you, resenting you, trying to prove I was better. I don't know how to just be sisters." Her honesty surprised me. "I don't think we ever learned how," I replied gently. Victoria nodded, finally meeting my gaze. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since Grandma's party about why I was so convinced you must be manipulating her or hiding something suspicious." She took a deep breath. I think I couldn't imagine someone doing all those things without wanting recognition or reward, because that's not how I operate. Everything I've ever done has been at least partly calculated for how it would be perceived." The admission clearly cost her, her knuckles white around her coffee cup. "We're different people, Victoria. We always have been. That doesn't make either approach wrong, just different." She laughed softly. "That's very generous considering I hired private investigators to spy on you." I couldn't help smiling. "Well, when you put it that way..." We both chuckled, the tension easing slightly. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria ventured. "Why did you keep everything so private? All the things you did for Grandma, the scholarship, the volunteer work. Why not tell anyone?" I considered my answer carefully. Partly because it never seemed necessary. Good deeds don't need an audience to matter. But partly, I hesitated, choosing honesty over comfort. I didn't want to deal with the family's reactions. Mom and Dad questioning my financial decisions, everyone offering opinions on Grandma's care, possibly even trying to take over decisions I'd carefully made with her doctors. Victoria nodded slowly. "I think I understand that better now. I would have steamrolled in with opinions and connections and probably made everything about my contribution rather than what Grandma actually needed." Her self-awareness surprised me. Over the next hour, Victoria explained how her entire life had been shaped by feeling compared to me. "You were always the sensitive one, the creative one, the one with depth," she explained. "So I became the achiever, the successful one, because that was the only space left for me to occupy." In turn, I shared how I'd always felt inadequate beside her confidence and accomplishments. Mom and Dad never quite knew what to do with my artistic interests and emotional nature, I admitted. Your path made sense to them. Mine was confusing, impractical. Victoria looked genuinely surprised. "I always thought they favored you because you were more like Grandma, thoughtful and deep. I was more like Dad's side of the family, practical and ambitious. It's strange how we can grow up in the same house and have completely different experiences," I observed. Victoria nodded, then hesitated before asking, "How is Grandma doing?" "Better," I replied. The stress of family conflict was actually affecting her health more than we realized. Her doctor says her numbers have improved since the birthday. Victoria looked down at her hands. "I've been visiting her twice a week, just sitting with her, listening to her stories, not planning or organizing or trying to impress her with my accomplishments. It's different." I smiled, imagining this new version of Victoria simply being present with our grandmother. "She's mentioned how much she enjoys your visits." The conversation shifted to Michael and his children, whom Victoria had recently invited for a weekend at her lake house. "I never really understood what he was going through with the divorce," she admitted. "I was so busy judging his failure that I couldn't see his pain." 2 days later, my phone rang with an unexpected invitation. Victoria wanted me to join her at a fundraising committee meeting for the Children's Hospital. "They need someone to develop an expanded art therapy program," she explained. "I thought of you immediately." I agreed cautiously, still adjusting to this new version of our relationship. The meeting was a revelation. Victoria's organizational skills and social connections, previously directed toward impressing her social circle, were impressive when channeled toward meaningful causes. She commanded attention, articulated needs clearly, and secured commitments from wealthy donors with practiced ease. Afterward, she approached me somewhat hesitantly. "Would you consider giving me a tour of where you work? I'd like to better understand what you do." The following week, Victoria visited the modest art therapy room at the hospital. I watched her take in the children's artwork displayed on the walls, the simple supplies, the worn furniture. "It's not very impressive, I know," I said, suddenly, self-conscious about the cramped space and limited resources. Victoria shook her head. "It's real. That's impressive enough." The breakthrough came when 7-year-old Lily, one of my regular patients recovering from severe burns, invited Victoria to join our session. I expected my polished, perfectionist sister to decline politely. Instead, she kicked off her expensive shoes, rolled up her sleeves, and sat cross-legged on the floor as Lily taught her to make paper butterflies. "They're like me," Lily explained seriously, showing Victoria her scarred arms. "They transform into something beautiful even after being all wrapped up and hidden." I watched Victoria's expression soften as she carefully helped Lily with her delicate creation. By the session's end, Victoria's designer blouse was speckled with glitter and paint, but her smile was genuine. "I think I understand now," she told me quietly as we left. "What you do matters in ways my corporate success never will." Over the following months, a new pattern emerged in our family. Victoria began using her business network to secure funding for the art therapy program. I learned to share more openly about my needs and challenges, rather than silently bearing every burden. Our parents, witnessing this transformation, began their own process of reflection about the roles they had unconsciously assigned us. Grandma Eleanor flourished with reduced family tension, her health noticeably improving. During a Sunday dinner at Eleanor's house, now a regular family tradition, Victoria surprised everyone by announcing she was scaling back her executive role to create a non-profit foundation connecting corporate resources with community programs. "I've realized I can use my skills for something more meaningful than impressing the right people," she explained, glancing at me with a small smile. Later that evening, as I helped Eleanor with her evening medications, she took my hand. "Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Rachel," she said wisely. "It's a journey you choose daily." I nodded, understanding the truth in her words. Victoria and I were not suddenly best friends with a perfect relationship. We still occasionally fell into old patterns, still triggered old insecurities in each other. But we were learning to recognize those moments, to pause and choose different responses. The final family gathering before I began recording this story was for Eleanor's 81st birthday, a simple celebration at her home with homemade food and genuine conversation. Victoria and I worked together to prepare Eleanor's favorite dishes, moving around the kitchen with a comfortable rhythm that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. As I watched Victoria carefully frosting the cake while asking Eleanor questions about her childhood, I realized how profoundly our family had been transformed. The private investigators Victoria had hired to expose my secrets had inadvertently created the opportunity for truth and healing that our family desperately needed. The assumptions that had nearly destroyed our relationship ultimately became the catalyst for rebuilding it on a foundation of understanding rather than competition. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, I hope you found something valuable in our family's journey. Perhaps you've recognized patterns from your own relationships with siblings or family members. Maybe you've seen how misunderstandings and insecurities can distort our perceptions of each other. Or possibly you've been reminded that the truth, however uncomfortable initially, ultimately offers the only path to genuine connection. I'd love to know if anything in our story resonated with your experiences. Have you ever misjudged someone close to you, only to discover your perception was clouded by your own insecurities? Have you experienced a moment of revelation that transformed a relationship? Drop a comment below to share your thoughts. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if our family's journey touched you in some way. Remember, sometimes the most painful confrontations can lead to the most beautiful transformations. Thank you for listening, and I wish you courage on your own journey toward understanding and healing in your relationships.